Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope coming to you from Toronto, Canada. In today's first segment, we're going to discuss Lebanon. And of course, we've been following the news coming out of Lebanon very closely. The top of the news, of course, is Saad al-Hariri's resignation as prime minister. And of course, Michel Aoun saying that reforms are also needed, even calling for a change of this sectarian system in place in the country at this time. Will that actually happen on the ground, or will the people just be placated and appeased in other fashions as well? And will Hariri come back into power anyhow? So then what really has been achieved if he will be back in power anyhow? And then the other piece of news, which is important with Lebanon, is that of U.S. aid, where the Trump administration has now decided to withhold aid to Lebanon, even though it itself had requested that aid not too long ago from the State Department, the Pentagon, who have approved that aid. But then the Trump administration now making the decision not to provide aid to Lebanon. Many people saying that other external players will then now have a chance to have further influence within Lebanon than the United States. Let's discuss all of that a bit further. We're joined now by Shigenobu, who is a political analyst and writer on Middle Eastern issues and a media specialist. She lives in Beirut, but is currently visiting Japan for public talks. We're also joined by Haytham Mouzahem, who is the head of the Beirut Center for Middle East Studies. He's joining us now from the Lebanese capital, Beirut. Haytham and May, thank you both for your time today. Haytham, I'd like to start with you. What do you make of what's occurred in your country recently when it comes to, of course, the resignation of Saad al-Hariri? Was that a good first step, considering the fact that many people are saying that he'll just come back into power very soon?
Now, tomorrow on Tuesday, there will be a consultation of the parliamentary members. Every member of the parliament will nominate his candidate for the prime minister position. So who will get the majority, the president will assign him to form the government. There are many scenarios. One of them, they will renominate Saad Hariri again, and he will form his government with consultation with the other parliamentary blocs. The other scenario, they will nominate another one, which may be close to Saad al-Hariri, like the former Prime Minister Tamam Salam. And the third one, they may nominate a third one, which is from the opposition, from the alliance against Saad Hariri, which is closer to Aoun and President Aoun and Hezbollah.
May, this question is for you. Can you, just tell me, May, what you make of Hariri if he were to come back into power? Would anything have really been achieved at that time?
You see, the problem with the system is that when you have Hariri coming back, it means that another Sunni leader comes back, which is, again, the sectarian system and divide. And so it only serves with the same head of government. We will only have members that are supposedly technocratic, supposedly experts. Aoun requested for these newly appointed ministers to be completely loyal to only the state and not loyal to political parties. However, this is not guaranteed, because the way things happen is that when you nominate people, it comes from the political powers that they nominate these people who they think are the expertise. So we go back to the same circle of having people being nominated and creating a government with the excuse of being expertise or specialists, but in actuality, they are still people who are aligned to those political parties and political leaders. The solution should have been with this protest was that, you see, when you remove the head of government, you have just removed the shape or the face of things. But you have a systematic problem, and this is what everyone is against. And the systematic problem is the sectarian system, where you have this patronage system where people are appointed according to their sectarian and loyalties. So when you want to remove this, it's actually the other way around. the real way should have been that the parliament should have been forced to enact several laws, reforms that are first, for example, to create an independent judiciary system, to abolish the bank secrecy for politicians, to create accountability laws that will remove this immunity of politicians, so that if there is corruption, they should be actually punished. And these things should be enacted in the current parliament before asking this current parliament to resign at an early stage, even though it is still early for them to resign.
Let me ask Haytham then about that, because Haytham, do you think that the changes that are being demanded by protesters, and even as May alluded to there, within how this system works, will that occur actually? Because, the demands are quite large and quite significant for the system. I wonder if this is even really possible within this construct.
Actually, it's not possible now to change the system in Lebanon. The sectarian system is made since the foundation of Lebanon in 1920. So even after the civil war for 15 years, we had the Ta'if agreement, and we had also the sectarian system, and before it was it wasn't written. Now it's written. This is what they call the act, the act, sectarian act or national act. So the position they are for Sunni or Shia or Christian, they are divided according to the constitution now. So if you want to talk about changing the regime or changing the system, this may lead to another war or to another divide in the country. The Christians, they will not accept any change or any changing the regime or another agreement, other the Ta'if agreement. What people need now, not changing the sectarian regime. It's a need, but it's not an urgent need. What they need now, it's economic reforms, the accountability, and getting rid of the corruption, punishment of the corrupted politician, whoever they were, they were stealing the budget or whatever,
Okay, so May, I wonder though, within the construct right now in the governance system in Lebanon, are these sorts of reforms even possible? And then doesn't this pretty much bring us back to the main point of corruption anyhow, where a lot of these ruling elite in these different sects know that there is this quota, or however we want to term it, that there are these special places specifically because of sects or faith, however we want to put it, and that sort of just reaps corruption sort of just by definition.
Yes, it's true. The whole system is allowing for the corruption to continue, whoever comes to the system. So this patronage system where, the leader of the sect or the leader of the political party of that sect is giving services to his constituents, and then these constituents accept whatever division of wealth and corruption is occurring at the top levels of the government. So what the protesters, I was actually on the streets with the protesters up until last week, and everyone in the streets are asking for or demanding for also the removal of the sectarian system. Yes, it's an old system. Yes, it is the Ta'if that is a written constitution that allowed for the peace treaty between the warring factions in the Lebanese civil war. However, it's time, because at the time, people are just fresh after war. People are still, at the edges. They want to take whatever is given to them as possible. But now that this war has been over, it was over since 1990. So it's high time that people start to think about how to build a nation without really thinking about their loyalties to specific sects and politicians. And as you can see in all those images, the only flag that is raised because of this specific demand is the Lebanese flag, because the Lebanese people in the streets today, even though I'm sure everyone have emotions towards their sect still and their leaders, but deep inside, they know that they have to overcome the sectarian system to be able to really fight this corruption and to be able to build a nation that is good for everyone, not just, part and partial for the sects and in specific regions.
Very well. All right, we're going to thank May and Haytham for their time and, of course, their insight. We're going to add two more new voices to this conversation to continue it. We're joined now by Walid and Houri, who is the lead editor of Open Democracies North Africa West Asia section. He's a journalist and researcher and holds a PhD in media studies from the University of Amsterdam. He's joining us from Beirut. Also joining us from the Lebanese capital is Joseph Sokhon, who is a PhD candidate in international relations. He is a researcher with a focus on geopolitics in part. Joseph and Walid, thank you for your time today. Walid, let me start with you. What do you make of the Trump administration's right now decision to withhold aid from Lebanon? I mean, I imagine in the midst of all the political chaos that has occurred in the country, this is possibly pretty bad news.
So, hi, first of all. First, I wanted to, point out something that, it's one of these news items that are not actually being discussed much here, because amid all the things that are happening, I don't think people are very much interested in in American administration withholding help money for the military. Also, the other thing is that I just saw now that there was some reports that it's not yet confirmed, but that I don't know. In any case, something like this can be put in a normal context of now all the regional, also international stakeholders in the country trying to find their way through and pressure the new government, let's say. But for now, I think this is it's quite unimportant news for many people here, because this will not affect the economic situation, which is the main concern.
All right. So, Joseph, what are your thoughts on that? Because Walid is, of course, there is still seemingly a debate happening in America, within American politicians, I should say, about this aid, with the State Department and I believe Pentagon disagreeing with Donald Trump about withholding this aid from Lebanon at this time. What are your thoughts about this?
First of all, the U.S. did not cancel the security assistance; it only withheld it for I think a short period of time. Second, this security aid is very crucial for the Lebanese army, which is considered a very good ally for the Americans. And the United States tried many times to build an armed force in Lebanon to counter Hezbollah. And I think the Lebanese army is a very important ally for the U.S. government. And this security aid is important for the Lebanese army to protect the borders, which currently is damaging the economy due to the illegal cross-border movement of money, goods, and individuals. I want to highlight the time that the United States didn't want to deliver this security assistance, which coincided with the uprising. And the United States doesn't want to be framed as instigator of this uprising. And more importantly, the United States wants to seek very closely the reaction of the army and the government to the protest in case they use too much power to quell it.
Right.
And therefore, the United States is using...
Yeah, so let me bring in Walid, if I may, Joseph, on that point. Joseph, pardon me, Walid, one of the things that comes up at this point is that I imagine at the very least it is symbolic that America is talking about withholding aid, right? I mean, is it that America wants the Lebanese people to know that, listen, it still wants the kind of influence that it's had in the country so far? Or is it just about grandstanding? What do you think is really happening vis-a-vis the messaging that may be occurring in this regard?
I think it's now very difficult to have a good idea of what the message of the U.S. is, because I think there's divisions within. So it's also, I mean, and this is not only the case of Lebanon. I think this is something that we've seen in other contexts where there is an internal disagreement between the president and his team and other other forces. But I mean, I'm trying to think, for instance, like a lot of the military support from the U.S. to the Lebanese army or internal security forces also has had very clear political agenda, and that is to create a force that's capable to face Hezbollah. Whether that is a good idea or not, whether that would lead to amounts of violence that are not necessary, I personally think that armed solutions are not solutions. But this is a political issue, and the Hezbollah weapons at the moment, when it comes to the protest, because I think that's the important thing here, have not been an issue, have not been something that people are raising. People are protesting regardless of any of these political divisions. There is a impressive class movement in a way. There is a movement of demands. There is main concern that has crossed across all sectarian and social strata, that is claiming that there's a crisis and we need to face it. And right now, political divisions, when it comes to geopolitics or the weapons of Hezbollah, are, in my opinion, irrelevant for most people.
Do you Joseph? Because that's an important point, isn't it? Where genuinely, and as we have seen with these Lebanese protests, it's been across the spectrum. It's been all sects seemingly out on the streets protesting against a corrupt elite of either sect, really. All these elite taking advantage of the system in place. Do you agree that the Hezbollah arms aren't really as big a deal as maybe people in America might think?
I don't think it's a big deal for the United States currently. I think that the United States what wants is a strong country, a strong state, which is able to quell Hezbollah, to minimize its influence regionally and nationally. And if we can see, like during the last few governments, we had some presence of Hezbollah, which the United States accepted to a certain extent. But with the protest now that swept across the country, the United States wants to stay a bit outside of it, so it won't be framed like as instigator of this protest, and therefore it will make things more complicated than they are.
Okay, so let's go then to the protests themselves and what's been achieved so far, if anything. Obviously, we've had Hariri's resignation occurring, but the greater demand of changing the system, which is a huge demand. I mean, I imagine within the construct of Lebanese politics, will that ever really realistically occur?
I mean, I think we can talk on two levels here. One is the realistic level of what are the actual political options that are coming. And the other level is what has been achieved, which is beyond that, beyond the balances of power in governmental seats, for instance. The resignation of Hariri is important, but I think it is not the biggest win in a way, because it's neither the first nor the last government to resign, and definitely not the first Hariri government to resign. But what has been achieved right now is already quite an impressive social transformation and a transformation of the political discourse in the country. It is the first time we see people demonstrating against their parties, claiming rights, claiming specifically demands that that are economic, that are social, that are also political, in the sense that it's the first time we see so many demands for going beyond sectarianism, for instance, from people across the country. The other thing is that, yes, I do think that this system is not sustainable. I mean, how far it will go before it accepts change, that's to be seen, and how much violence will it want to go for before they go. But what we have seen is that the slogan itself, all of them means all of them, has been a very strong slogan, and something that the political ruling establishment itself has been constantly proving again and again, while trying to actually quell the protests by showing how much corruption is entrenched and how much false promises that they keep making. I think the political discourse of the political establishment, and I put them also in this case, all of them together, regardless of geopolitical differences or internal differences, but as ruling classes, because they are all part of the government. They have been speaking a language that's completely not speaking to what is happening on the ground. They are still promising the same things. They are still using the sectarian card, and they are all supporting the protests, interestingly enough. And all of them have been trying to do...
I'm going to cut you off. I do apologize, but unfortunately, the clock has gotten the best of us. But we do sincerely, of course, appreciate your insight, and, of course, Joseph's insight as well, and for your time, of course, today, putting this all into context for us, because, of course, the context that all of our guest viewers have given to us, May and Haytham included, is important, of course, for this military aid, or this aid that, the U.S. provides to Lebanon's army. That's an important context, and I think it's symbolic at this specific time. What is the message that Trump is trying to send to the Lebanese establishment about what's happened in the country vis-a-vis protests, corruption, etc.? And then, of course, there is the issue of the Houri resignation itself. Will that actually mean a change in the system? Will Houri be back in power in no time? Then what's really being achieved going forward? Because changing the system that has been in place for so many years, one can imagine, will not happen without a fight of some sort. We'll keep a close eye on that here in Scope. I'll be back with my next segment after this break. Stay tuned. All right. Well, welcome back to Scope viewers. You're still with us, and we're discussing in this segment now Greece and it handling all the refugees that it is at this time. There's been an uptick, in fact, in Syrian refugees, or Syrian asylum seekers, I should say more correctly, who are trying to cross into Greece because of the recent violence that has been occurring since last year till this year in that war-torn country. Now, obviously, as we well know, the issue of refugees has been one which has been long-standing throughout Europe, and Greece is, of course, no stranger to this, considering it hosts so many of the refugees that cross over the seas, specifically landing into countries like Greece and others right at the edge of Europe. There has been an issue of distribution of refugees throughout Europe as well, with many countries simply not taking part in any such programs as well. But then there's also now this bill that has been tabled in Greece, which many human rights organizations are worried about the rights of asylum seekers, and specifically also the children of asylum seekers as well. What does this mean then going forward for those asylum seekers, and how they'll be treated in Greece and then possibly throughout Europe? Let's discuss that a bit further. We're joined now by Filippa, who is an assistant professor of international politics at the University of Athens. She's joining us now from the Greek capital itself. Filippa, as always, we appreciate your time. What do you make, Filippa, of Greece's handling so far of refugees? I mean, no one doubts that it's handling a significant number of them.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Actually, Greece has a new drama. This is the second drama. The first one was in 2015, where we have the biggest resurgence of refugee arrivals. And now this is the second phase of this drama. You can imagine we have, in some months, we have an increase of 80% of the number of asylum seekers in Greece. So this is a huge number. In the island of Lesbos, in Moria, we have an increase from 5,000 to 13,000 people. So this is a new humanitarian crisis. And at the same time, we have a new government. The recently elected conservative government of New Democracy decided to adopt a very tough stance on migration issues. So the new bill that has just been adopted 2 days before in the Greek Parliament proposes, let's say, a new, very securitarian policy. This is, let's say, a new doctrine. We can call this doctrine a law and order doctrine, okay? And let's say the most important point of this bill is first that they are going to streamline a very lengthy, as they say, asylum process until now, and they are going to facilitate evictions and deportations of rejected asylum seekers. This is the idea.
Yeah. So then, Filippa, do you think that this is the best way to deal with this increase of 80%, as you mentioned? I mean, is this the best way to deal with this?
My personal opinion is that this is not a good idea. Of course, it's not the good way to proceed, because they think that by doing that, they are going to apply, you say, a strategy, as we can say, of deterrence. This means more tough we are, less they will decide that they will want to come to our country. But it doesn't work like this.
Yeah.
I mean, these people, they don't have the choice. Here is, collective behavior of no choice. So it will not work. This is my opinion. It will not work. But at the same time, let's say the government approach fits very well with the European approach, with the EU approach. This is exactly the same idea. We don't need solidarity policies, but we need repressive policies. We need tough control policy in the borders. But at the same time, in order to have, this kind of very strict, tightened policies, we need also good and efficient administration. We need infrastructures. We should make hirings in the administration. You see what I mean? In order to have a smooth administrative and also judicial procedures. But this would not be possible because Greece, according to the post-memoranda commitment, has not the possibility to make hirings in the administration. This is exactly the opposite. So how are they going to manage?
But then I imagine, Filippa, I mean, all that you've mentioned, if we put it in the context of the fact that Greece is still very much a recovering economy, and you and I well know, of course, about the troubles that Greece has gone through economically in these years. I mean, I imagine that any politician would turn around and say, listen, our country simply cannot take on this much responsibility, so we need to do something in some regard and be very tough.
Yeah, of course, this is the discourse. The discourse is that we need to have policies of cleaning, okay, and to be very strict. So the strategy of deterrence, as I was saying before, but it will not work because these people, they will always try to find solutions to come in Greece because this is the only way to go later on. They hope in the other European countries. So this means that we will have even more mafia networks. They are going to be more active than before. This is the thing. We will not have more illegality in all the procedures in order to cross the country, and so even more people in danger. We will have exactly the opposite result by applying this kind of policy. But the government, I think that they think that this is a way also to satisfy a big part of the Greek society. That's because they have been elected also on this kind of promises, you see. This was a pre-electoral promises. So they are doing that also for domestic reasons. It's not only their idea or their approach on migration and asylum policy. There are also domestic reasons to go on this direction. But I am very afraid that the results will be very, very negative for the country, for all these people that are in the country now, all these people that are in a very, very bad situation. And it's not only, a question of violation of European law and of international treaties and of Geneva Convention. Of course, it's also a legal problem, but it's foremost is a humanitarian problem. It's a human problem. So saying that refugees and migrants also that they are thinking for a job are our big danger. You see, this is a new doctrine, and actually even the EU. I think they are very pleased to see the Greek government to act like this. And the Greek commissioner, the new Greek commissioner.
Certainly is very troubling, isn't it? Certainly we need to remember that all these people are human beings at the end. We'll have to leave that, of course, as our final word, Filippa. But of course, we do sincerely, of course, appreciate your time and your expert insight on this issue, because, it's important to hear, isn't it, viewers, from Greece itself about how people there are viewing this situation. And certainly, there's no doubt that any country, A, that is a recovering economy, and B, is at the receiving end of these large numbers of people, and now with an increase of 80%, will react in some fashion. And it's down ready to the European Union, which has been claiming from day one this high moral stance when it comes to how it deals with the refugee crisis and how it deals with these human beings. They're not just numbers. They are humans at the end of the day who are trying to find safety and security for their respective families. Certainly, this bill that has been tabled in the Greek parliament is troubling. Will it deter more people from coming in or not is not even the most important issue. It is about the humanity and how inhumane this bill will make things for those asylum seekers in that country. We'll keep a close eye on that, of course, here in Scope. I'll be back with my final segment, though, after this. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. In this segment, we're going to discuss the Trump impeachment process, which, as you well know, is moving forward at this time. The House is now speaking about public hearings. And of course, this, I imagine, is all a nightmare for Donald Trump himself, who so much relies on having a positive public image. And of course, he's probably faltered in many such regards when it comes to that. But of course, this is important at this time with this process moving forward and what this may mean for Donald Trump's future in politics as well. Let's discuss that a bit further. We're joined now by Vincent Vernuccio, who is the president of the American Analysis of News and Media. He's served previously in an executive capacity, both for Democrat and Republican administrations at the state and local level. That's for over 2 decades. He's joining us now from New York. Frank, good morning. What do you make, Frank, of the rules at this point in time?
Interestingly enough, most politicians would have considered this sort of thing close to a death knell. President Trump seems to thrive on this type of controversy. Most of the public is seeing this as a continuation of the charges of Russian collusion, which, as you recall, came against the president shortly after his victory in the 2016 campaign. Indeed, many of the same figures who brought the charges of Russian collusion, a charge which eventually was proven without any merit, are now the same figures in the current impeachment process. So it's the same battle lines are forming as formed previously against this president.
But then I wonder, Frank, if we're completely honest with ourselves, there have been many missteps by this president, haven't there, when it comes to even this process also? I mean, certainly, I imagine there would have been a better way to go about his reactions to it.
This is indeed a very unconventional American president. He does not respond like a politician or like an attorney. Most people in American politics are professional politicians or attorneys. This president reacts as a businessman. He has a temper and he's not afraid to show it. It certainly does not play well in the media, but again, it's part and parcel of who this president is.
Okay, so then moving forward, if we're talking about the impeachment process itself, if we're looking into the crystal ball of the future, of course, and no one knows exactly how this may all play out, but a lot of people have been speaking about the fact that there may be the first step of the impeachment process may move forward in the Senate or the like, but that this may not go to a hearing. Is that what your take is on this as well?
No, the process of impeachment is partially political, partially legislative and partially like a court trial. The next step will be the Judiciary Committee, led by Representative Jerry Nadler of New York, will begin hearings. The president should, I believe, under this process, have the opportunity to cross-examine some of the witnesses. If it goes forward from there, the entire Congress, the entire House of Representatives, rather, will vote on it. Right now, there's 232 Democrats, 196 Republicans. It'll be a party line vote, which means that there will probably be a vote to impeach the president. At that point, it then moves to the other house of the legislature, the United States Senate, where there is a substantial majority of Republicans. The Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court will preside over it. It will be conducted like a trial. The senators will act as a jury. At this point, politically, 19 Republicans, members of the president's own party, would have to vote against the president for the impeachment to be successful and for the president to be removed from office.
Do you think that there has been quid pro quo which has occurred here?
Well, of course, that is indeed the question. I would have to say, we would have to follow what Alan Dershowitz, who is the former dean of the Harvard Law School and considered the prime American constitutional scholar, has said, and he believes that there has not been a legal definition of a quid pro quo.
All right. So then, when we're looking at this entire thing, though, this Ukraine call and the way it occurred, it certainly looks bad, doesn't it? Where you have the president speaking about an investigation into the Bidens, Hunter Biden more specifically, of course. All of that, the optics are very bad. I mean, I imagine, though, that at some level these sorts of conversations do happen between many world leaders at some point in time. But the fact that this came out into the open, how do you think that this has then been or should have been handled maybe by the White House?
Well, part of the problem with a Trump presidency has been that without having a political background, without having the type of party alliances that most of the presidents, indeed almost all of the presidents have had, the president is not really in control of his own bureaucracy. And indeed, you are absolutely correct. These types of discussions do take place among world leaders all the time. The difference in this case is that it got exposed. The president is not known to have deep alliances within the bureaucracy. So a conversation which for other presidents probably would never have seen the light of day did indeed become public for this administration. And
then the issue of the Bidens itself. I mean, I know a lot of people have said, listen, the evidence is not there. Hunter Biden didn't do anything incorrect as such in his dealings there in Ukraine. However bad it may have looked for the fact that his father was, of course, vice president at the time. Do you, though, think that it is worth, in fact, that investigation occurring just within the context of Ukraine itself and into the Bidens?
Well, according to the Code of Federal Regulations, the United States law controlling in this particular type of issue, the Bidens did indeed violate American law. The concept of using one's position for personal gain is one that's rather clear in American law. You're not supposed to do that at all. And remember, Ukraine is only the second case that we're talking about when it comes to the Bidens. Hunter Biden flew along with then Vice President Joe Biden to China at the same time that Vice President Biden was negotiating with China on behalf of the Obama administration. He came back with a $500 million deal in his pocket.
All right, we're going to say thank you to Frank, who was speaking to us there from New York, putting into context and giving us the latest about where the Trump impeachment process is at this time, and of course its impact and whether or not it really is even a legitimate process at this point in time, considering what Donald Trump is accused of having done at this point in time when it comes to Ukraine and asking for an investigation into the Bidens, which, I mean, I personally believe should really occur at this time. Why should the Bidens get a free pass for something that Hunter Biden did, taking advantage of his father's position at that point in time as the vice president of the United States? Nevertheless, Donald Trump also pressuring a foreign country and withholding aid possibly so that that country then does occur or carry out, an investigation into a political rival is also, of course, something that does not look good, at least the optics of it. We'll keep a close eye on how that works out, because certainly we're only at the beginning of this impeachment process. A lot more is still to come regarding that. I'll leave it there for now, though. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.